Something we need to understand about the US is when it starts going on about humanitarian reasons for interventions in various countries, that usually what that means is it's not about the human rights abuses in that country. It's not about that at all. It's not about human rights at all. It's about meddling and overthrowing governments that they do not feel serve their capitalist purposes. And when we hear the saber rattling about China, that is yet another example of US imperialist aims, seeing China as a threat in an economic sense, that China is overtaking the US in areas of the economy. They've got the Belt Road Initiative. They're making friends with people rather than going in and destroying countries. They're helping other countries rebuild. They're assisting countries that are being oppressed, where there's economic sanctions that are crippling them, and that's being done by the US. China is helping them with that, and so is Russia. And so the Chinese government and China is making friends with people in their efforts to build their economy and really basically overtake the US, which is what they've almost done. And this is unforgivable as far as the US goes. The US is a failing empire, and the US is a failed state. You can see that in how they are treating their citizens during a pandemic and beyond and before. It's not going to get any better. So the US empire is falling, and there are 800 bases all around the world. This is what happened to the US. This is what happened to the Roman Empire. It basically overextended itself, and the Praetorian Guard was choosing who was going to be leaders. You could almost call the Praetorian Guard the CIA in this case, and the US national security state. So I introduce it this way is because the GOP and Donald Trump have managed to, and also the corporate media, whatever party they are supporting, whatever part of the duopoly they are supporting, have managed to demonize China and are continuing to do so in an effort to basically, in some ways, destroy them. And you may have seen John Pilger's documentary, The Coming War on China. It was created in 2016. That gives you a background into how this is going to play out. Something I wanted to share with you by Max Blumenthal is an excerpt of a discussion he had with Aaron Mate on the Grey Zone on YouTube. You can find it, and I'll leave a link to it. And there was a number of issues discussed. And one of them was at the Capitol riot, there was a very strong anti-communist fervor there, an anti-China fervor, which has been used by Donald Trump to blame China. Donald Trump was promoting anti-China propaganda about China basically causing this pandemic around the world and creating it in a nefarious way to destroy the United States and all that, instead of taking responsibility for the 400,000 people that he has managed to kill through incompetence and just complete lack of interest in the public. He's trying to blame China for that. So unfortunately, the Q cult following that he has, so there's a lot of QAnoners there in that Capitol riot, as well as all the various white supremacists. There were other people there as well, but there was a lot of QAnoners and white supremacists, all kinds of different groups, the Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, etc. And unfortunately, they had completely taken on this anti-Chinese propaganda. And so the national religion of the US is anti-communism. And Empire Files with Abby Martin did a great show a great documentary about that, one of their programs really. One of their programs on the Empire Files with Abby Martin is about how the national religion of the US is anti-communism, and how they have basically demonized and really kept that going along for 100 years or so. And it's really baked into the DNA of a lot of US citizens that, this whole better dead than red kind of thing. And yet China has managed to pull 800 million people out of poverty. And yet the US right now is a failed state. So that's interesting, isn't it? That basically the US empire and its death machine capitalism have been destroying the lives of people now for a long, long time, and destroying other countries for many, many decades in a pursuit of resources and hegemony. And yet they're pointing to China as some sort of demonic monolith a demonic monolith of a evil country that is spreading COVID around to, whatever, sort of blah, 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 yada, yada, yada kind of thing. So Donald Trump weaponized COVID, basically, the propaganda associated with that, to demonize China. There were anti-communist Venezuelans in that Capitol riot. There were anti-communist Cubans in that Capitol riot, from what I understand, and anti-communist Falun Gong members. And I invite you to look into the Grey Zone's articles about the whole Uyghur genocide propaganda too. China has its problems, of course, but this whole Uyghur genocide thing is based on one person, mostly Adrian Zenz, who is basically a kook. And if you look up the Grey Zone, you'll find out all about Adrian Zen's background. And he is the go-to person in the corporate media about that. Does China have problems with the Uyghurs? I'm sure they probably do. But that whole Uyghur genocide is part of this whole basis to, at some point, either invade China, which will be a tremendous mistake. You can see how there would be a number of countries, if there were World War III, if it didn't end up in just mutually assured destruction, which it probably would, but just say it didn't. You could see that, China, Iran, Russia, and Venezuela and different countries could all come together to defeat the greatest perpetrator of violence in the world, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, which is the U.S. basically. Max Blumenthal was at the Capitol building when this was going on, when the riot was happening, because he doesn't live that far from the Capitol building in D.C. And he said that there was the major thing that he noticed with all those Q supporters and the white supremacists, etc., was this anti-Chinese sentiment, the anti-communist sentiment. What is frightening about that is that it just shows when you're basically, you're already in a cult, and then the cult leader, Donald Trump, has expressed anti-China sentiments throughout his presidency, and then you get it weaponized also by the U.S. national security state, which some people might call the deep state. The U.S. national security state is the seamless thread that goes through all different administrations. It serves the purposes of the U.S. national security state in the weapons industry, military-industrial complex, etc., to have that sort of sentiment by Donald Trump and also by the Democratic Party. You'll hear that as well. Not as much lately, but it's definitely something that is there because Antony Blinken, who is now the Secretary of State of Joe Biden, has already expressed those same sentiments that you would hear by Donald Trump, just maybe more eloquently. He is the measured servant of the U.S. national security state. He may not make crass statements about China that are really overtly racist, but he will pursue those goals that the U.S. national security state has in either invading China or destroying China in some ways. Antony Blinken crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's when it came to every single country that the U.S. has in its crosshairs, from Iran to Venezuela to China to Russia. And he was also propping up, he said there was nothing racist about apartheid Israel. Not that he was asked that question, that it was apartheid Israel, but he was asked by Lindsey Graham, did he have any problem with Israel? Did he think it was a racist country? And Antony Blinken said no. Antony Blinken is a complete Zionist, as is Joe Biden, as is Kamala Harris. They all get lobbyist money from AIPAC, the Israel lobby. So we can't expect anything good to happen for Palestinian rights at all in this administration. It's quite grim, and it's not surprising that Antony Blinken would be like this. Not surprising whatsoever. But he is completely on board with the anti-China propaganda, with either invading China or somehow meddling with them. And so that is going to go on unabated, just as it did before with the Trump administration. And it is too bad that the brunch people that sort of say now we can go to brunch, like they said, if Hillary Clinton had been in, we could have gone to brunch, which would have been, it's another way of saying when the Democratic Party is in, everything is just hunky-dory. Even though the Democratic Party often does worse things than the GOP in relation to endless wars. Obama expanded 2 wars to 7. The NDAA became a horror story. Basically, anybody in the Democratic Party becomes either a soft imperialist or they're a full-on war hawk. That includes the Squad. They'll probably be soft imperialists at best, eventually, if they aren't already. And then you get all the blue check people who are diehard Democratic Party ideologues. They'll all go to sleep. But that is why we can't do that, because imperialism, US imperialism, goes on unabated throughout these administrations. And the US national security state, the one that is basically the seamless thread, makes sure that it does. Lloyd Austin, who is, I think he's the head of the Pentagon or something. This is a black military person. He basically has been on the board of, I think it's Raytheon. And Raytheon paid him out $1.6 million before he became this head of the Pentagon. So this is the sort of people that they put in power, who are basically just representatives for the weapons industry. They never really separate from the weapons industry. And you know that $1.6 million that Raytheon gave Lloyd Austin before he left Raytheon is a sort of a bribe, basically. It's like, Mr. Austin, we want you to, to keep us in mind when you're drumming up or backing up every war that is put in front of you. Keep us in mind. We want to be the ones that you choose the planes for, the nuclear ballistic missiles, any kind of tactical nuclear weapons and so forth. We want to be the ones that you think of when there is some war that is mentioned, and it will always be mentioned, and it will always go on, because that is the nature of that duopoly. They are totally on board with one another when it comes to endless war. I probably meandered all over the place there, as I do, and I apologize for that. What I was trying to say is basically that the duopoly is okay with a war on China. I'm not sure how they think they could win that, but they see that as an imperative, and we're going to hear nothing but saber rattling, escalating in the next 4 years, and something really bad could happen, because basically when you mess with China, you take on something that is so tremendous that there could be dire consequences. The Chinese government and the Chinese people are not going to be able to be rolled over and stomped on like smaller countries like Venezuela and the like. There's 1 billion plus people in China, and so this is going to be something that is going to be something way basically the US will bite off way more than they can chew if they think they can do over China. Because China is the economic power now in the 21st century. They play the long game. They look in terms of 100 years, whereas the US looks in terms of very short-sighted and does not have any vision except to have full spectrum dominance. That's all the US is interested in at any cost, and they do not care about their own people, and that will be their undoing. That is their undoing. Check out this next excerpt from Max Blumenthal about the anti-communist fervor within this Capitol riot. And also check out, I might pick out a couple of excerpts from Antony Blinken when he had his hearing, the Senate hearing, to see if he was appropriate to become the Secretary of State for Joe Biden. And of course, nobody gets put up for Secretary of State unless they are full on into war, that they're a war hawk. No one will get anywhere near that, becoming Secretary of State, unless they are a war hawk. So I'll see if I can find, there was many things that he said that were what you would expect an imperialist war hawk to say, and I'll pick out the ones about China. Thanks for watching. My name is Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Sequence from Vega. Stay tuned.
At the Stop the Steal riot, you heard people talking about China in a paranoid way, if I understand it correctly.
I mean, that's most of what I heard. I would never deny that this crowd might be animated by anti-blackness or anti-Semitism. For sure, there are elements in it that are driven by that kind of racism. But the most vocal resentment that was expressed in my presence was towards China, and with the Capitol Police acting as an arm of the Communist Party of China. You work for CCP, and I documented it. I published video. It was omnipresent, along with anti-communism. Everyone who was seen as obstructing this riot was a communist, period. And of course, anti-communism is America's national religion, and this anti-China campaign is a bipartisan project, not only of the national security state, but of the left of center establishment media, the New York Times, the Washington Post. And, for the progressive left, it's marketed in terms of human rights propaganda. But for the right, it's marketed in terms of China presenting a dire threat to the national sovereignty of the U.S., actually seeking to control the U.S. through Democrats, and it's really breaking through. It's fallen on fertile soil. And I should also mention that there were Falun Gong flags of the anti-China or anti-Chinese government cult that oversees the Epoch Times paper, which is a right-wing paper that is an organ of Trumpism, as well as right-wing anti-communist Venezuelans, right-wing anti-communist Cubans, right-wing anti-communist Eastern Europeans, and so many other figures who are aligned with exile movements that have been weaponized by the U.S. national security state in the service of U.S. empire. They were on the scene. So this is sort of an unacknowledged but key factor in providing the ideological coherence to this mob is anti-China hysteria and anti-communism in general.
Senator Grant.
Thank you. I trying to make sure that I don't violate the Geneva Convention here. The one thing I want to say is I think you're an outstanding choice by President-elect Biden. I've known you for a long time. I think you're loyal to the president. I think you understand the world. We have different viewpoints on certain issues, but to me, the whole point of this is to nominate qualified people, get them in place as quick as possible, reach agreement where you can, and disagree when you must. You have my complete support. The people at the State Department are incredibly patriotic. They live in dangerous places doing very dangerous things. They don't get the notoriety they deserve. So I'm just a big fan of soft power and foreign policy. The military has a very limited ability to change things, and they know it more than anybody else. So I think you're an outstanding choice. I intend to vote for you, but we're going to quickly go around the world and try to get a 30,000-foot view of where we start this new administration. Do you still consider Iran the largest state sponsor of terrorism?
I do.
Okay. Do you consider Israel a racist nation?
No, I do not.
Okay, that's a good start. Do you trust the Taliban to police Al-Qaeda and ISIS regarding attacking America?
Trust is not a word that I would apply.
No, that's right. I agree with you. So any agreement that trusts the Taliban to police Al-Qaeda and ISIS without us having some say, I think would be a bad deal. Appreciate that very much. Some people on the left have been saying that we should decriminalize entry into the country. Do you agree with that?
Not my jurisdiction, but I disagree.
Okay, all right. China. Secretary Pompeo designated the Chinese Communist Party as having engaged in genocide regarding the Uyghur Muslim population. Do you agree with that designation?
That would be my judgment as well.
You do agree?
Yes.
Yeah, we're on a good start here. So this really, I just very much appreciate that. Do you believe that the Chinese Communist Party misled the world about the coronavirus?
I do.
What price, if any, should they pay?
When it comes to China's role in the virus, I think we want to. There's as you know, an investigation that is ongoing. We obviously want to see the results of that investigation, but there's some things we already know.
If they don't cooperate, what should we do?
I think that we have to look at very hard, because that cooperation. This is really the point. I think of where we need to go on this. What we do know already with regard to China and the virus is that they did not provide transparency. They did not share information. They did not give access when it mattered most in the early days of this virus. Had they done so, it's possible that the course of the virus would have been different, and we could have dealt with it sooner and more effectively. My sense, Senator, going forward, is that what we should be focusing on, I know people talk about the punitive, I would be very focused on the preventative, which is to say,
sure,
what steps will China take going forward?
Like wet markets.
For example, right. Yes, a very, very good example.
Yeah, I agree with that. When it comes to Taiwan, it's been the policy of the United States to basically, for lack of a better term, to guarantee Taiwanese democracy. What's your view of that?
My view is we have an abiding and longstanding and bipartisan commitment to Taiwan and to the Taiwan Relations Act. We need to make sure that they have the means to deter aggression, to defend themselves. I'd like to see Taiwan even more engaged in the world. It's in many ways a model democracy, a strong economy, and a technological powerhouse. And of course, the way they've dealt with COVID-19 has a lot of lessons to teach us.
But if the Chinese Communist Party decided to use military force against the population in Taiwan, that would create great upheaval throughout the world, and they would pay a heavy price. Is that fair to say?
That would be a grievous mistake on their part.
Hong Kong. Seems to be that they're not really paying much attention to what Congress is doing and what this administration is doing regarding Hong Kong. What can we do to get their attention that we're not doing?
So I wish we had taken some steps earlier. The national security law, the crackdown on media, the crackdown on free speech, on assembly, all of that has, I think, put in tatters the notion of real freedom and autonomy in Hong Kong, which were guarantees in the handover. One of the things, this is not going to fix the problem, but I'd like to see us, for example, be able to take in some of those fleeing Hong Kong and fleeing the repression for standing up for their democratic rights. And I know there's some legislation that looks at doing that. But I think we have to take a hard look about what our position should be on the presence of institutions and companies there. Is it going to remain a hub and a financial center? Does Beijing then get both sides of the benefit? We should take a hard look at that.
I think the first thing we have to do is send a stronger message, because they're clearly not listening to this Congress and this administration's efforts, which I applaud, have fallen short. It's very difficult.
So I've looked at some of the so-called CATSA sanctions. I think that what Turkey has done as a NATO ally in acquiring the S-400s is unacceptable. The idea that a so-called strategic partner of ours would actually be in line with one of our biggest strategic competitors in Russia is not acceptable. I think we need to take a look and see the impact the existing sanctions have had, and then determine whether there's more that needs to be done.
Finally, so many people wonder where our biggest threat is. I'm going to just end with this thought. China is a problem, multiple layer problem. Russia's up to no good. There's two groups out there that I worry the most about. I think if the Iranians had a nuclear weapon, they would use it. I think the Ayatollah is a religious Nazi. Will you agree to at least talk to me and Senator Mendez about an alternative to the JCPOA when it comes to Iran?
I welcome talking to both of you and members of this committee about the way forward on Iran.
Okay. And finally, this is the 20th anniversary of 9/11. September this year will be 20 years. I think they're going to remind us that they're still out there. Do you agree with me that the worst thing America could do is have a false sense of security when it comes to radical Islam? Do you agree with the following proposition? The only reason they haven't killed more of us is they can't find a way to do it, and we pretty much kept our foot on their throat.
I share your concerns about the ongoing threat posed by what's left of Al-Qaeda, ISIS, other extremist groups that target the United States.
Finally, do you believe they had a nuclear or chemical weapon they could acquire when they would use it?
I think there's a high probability that if they had access to such a weapon, certainly in the past they would have, and going forward, something to be concerned about.
20 years later, where do we stand regarding the fight against Al-Qaeda and ISIS?
I think we've demonstrably made significant progress in different parts of the world against them. When it comes to Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, the original threat, there's still a problem. There's still a presence. There's still a relationship with the Taliban. It's much diminished from what it was, but precisely to your point, if we take our eye off that ball, there's a risk that it comes back. ISIS, I think, actually across two administrations, we succeeded in taking away its geographic caliphate in Iraq and in Syria. But there again, we can't take our eye off the ball. And then, of course, we've seen affiliates of both groups spread to different parts of the world. So we still have our work cut out for us.
Well, thank you. I look forward to working with you.